Happy new financial year and welcome to our July 2023 edition of This Month in Payroll. I'm Rowan Geddes, the National Leader of PwC's Payroll Advisory and Operations Practice, and we kick off this new financial year with a review of the Protecting Worker Entitlements Bill, which was passed early this month with a series of staggered commencement dates. In addition, we will discuss the Fair Work Ombudsman's continued focus on master franchisor obligations for their franchisees' wage underpayments, and developments in the employee's right to request to work from home. But first, the Fair Work legislation Protecting Worker Entitlement Bill. This is the most recent of the government's proposed IR changes, and it received royal assent on the 30th of June. It brings in a series of legislative changes, including 4 payroll-related changes, commencing at different dates, 2 on the 1st of July 2023, and then 2 at the end of 2023. The changes are: first, changes to unpaid parental leave. The legislation provides greater flexibility to employees in relation to their unpaid leave entitlements. From 1 July 2023, employees taking unpaid parental leave will be able to take up to 100 days, previously it was 30 days, of their 12-month leave entitlement flexibly, including as single days, during the 2 years after the birth or placement of their child. Secondly, pregnant employees will be able to access their flexible unpaid parental leave for up to 6 weeks before the expected date of birth of their child. And thirdly, both parents will be entitled to take up to 1 year of unpaid parental leave at any time within the first 2 years of the child's birth or placement, regardless of what their spouse is doing. They can also request a 12-month extension of that leave entitlement. The second change is protections for migrant workers. The legislation makes amendments to clarify that migrant workers still maintain their rights under the Fair Work Act and under their employment contracts, even if the worker has breached a condition of their work visa, worked without work rights, or been present in Australia without the right to do so. This clarification serves to address some of the more egregious treatments of migrant workers that have been reported over the years, such as not paying employees for all of the hours worked. The rights clarified include the right to be paid for all hours worked, even if there is a cap under the visa on how many hours an employee can work, receive a payslip every time they get paid, take breaks as allowed under their industrial instrument, and receive superannuation, subject to any treaty rules with their home country. The Ombudsman has also used this legislation to remind employers that it is illegal for an employer to require their employee to pay them in return for being sponsored on a visa, or to operate a cashback scheme, where an employer unreasonably requires someone to pay them in exchange for a job. Finally, the Ombudsman noted that they have arranged with Home Affairs that visa holders can seek help from the Fair Work Ombudsman regarding their pay without fear of it leading to a visa cancellation, even if they have breached their work-related visa conditions. The second wave of changes commence either on the 30th of December 2023 or the 1st of January 2024. Currently, where an employee has authorised in writing a deduction from an employer, that authorisation only works as long as the amount being deducted is the same. Should the amount vary, the employer is required to obtain a new authorisation from the employee. Following the amendment, employers will no longer need a new written authorisation every time an employee's authorised deduction amount changes. Instead, from the 30th of December 2023, employees will be able to authorise via one single written form variable salary deductions to be made by their employer, even if those amounts are recurring and vary from time to time. Note that the salary deductions need to be principally for the employee's benefit and must be made in writing. And the fourth change is that from the 1st of January 2024, the National Employment Standards will include the right to superannuation contributions. The National Employment Standards are the minimum entitlement that an employee can receive from their employer. Workplace instruments such as modern awards, enterprise agreements and employment contracts cannot provide for conditions less than the NES. There are currently 11 minimum NES entitlements, such as annual leave, long service leave, notice of termination and entitlement to redundancy pay. This change will make superannuation the 12th. The impact of this change is that it will give employees the right to pursue unpaid superannuation as a workplace entitlement through the Fair Work Ombudsman, as well as through the Tax Office, who retain primary responsibility for ensuring compliance. We expect that there will be more clarification offered between the Ombudsman and the ATO in the future, explaining how this dual regulator approach will be managed, and we'll keep you informed as this comes to light. Master franchisor and franchisee wage underpayments. We spoke in February about the Fair Work Ombudsman commencing proceedings in the Federal Court, seeking to hold a master franchisor, 85 Degrees, responsible for alleged wage underpayments of its franchisees. This was the first litigation of its kind since the Protecting Vulnerable Workers amendments were made to the Fair Work Act back in 2017. We now have a second instance, as this month the Fair Work Ombudsman initiated proceedings against another master franchisor, Baker's Delight, for failing to prevent its franchisees from underpaying workers. It is alleged that Baker's Delight commissioned an audit of its franchisees which was completed in February 2019. The audit identified underpayments at one of its franchisee companies, which, since July 2017, had failed to pay its workers overtime rates as per the Baker's Delight Enterprise Agreement, and also paid its workers at minimum rates rather than the general retail industry award rates. Baker's Delight asked the owners to commit to a range of measures to address the non-compliance issues. However, the franchisee refused to address the issue. It's then alleged that Baker's Delight took no further action. The Ombudsman argues that Baker's Delight is liable for roughly 50% of the underpayments made after February 2019, because in its view, it failed to take preventative action, and therefore it either knew or should reasonably have known that further underpayments would occur. Further, all parties could face a tenfold increase in maximum penalties for underpayments after that date, as the offences after February 2019 were committed knowingly. This case marks the second time that the Fair Work Ombudsman has tested the 2017 Vulnerable Workers legislation, using it to hold a franchisor liable for the alleged conduct of a franchisee. It should serve as a reminder of the Ombudsman's newfound willingness to apply the accessorial liability provisions to entities with a degree of influence or control over employees in their network, imputing responsibility if the entity knew or could reasonably be expected to have known that a contravention would or was likely to happen, and didn't take reasonable steps to prevent the contravention. These obligations can also apply to holding companies in respect of their subsidiaries within a corporate group structure. Both cases are scheduled to be heard over the next 2 months, and we will update once rulings are handed down. Flexible work arrangements. The issue of a worker's right to work from home continues to be a matter of focus in discussions between unions and employers. And this month, 3 separate actions were taken on the matter. First, the Australian Public Service, in their enterprise bargaining, enshrined a presumption that agencies will approve work flexibility requests and remove a cap on days spent working from home. Secondly, NAB enshrined an employee's right to request to work from home and to appeal unreasonable refusals as part of their union deal. This condition will limit the bank's capacity to refuse employee requests to a test of reasonableness, which is likely to require the bank to give specific business reasons. NAB's CEO has, however, strongly backed staff returning to the office, given that NAB is a relationship bank and relationships are best delivered face-to-face. And finally, Finance Sector Union has lodged a dispute application with the Fair Work Commission in response to a CBA requirement that its employees return to the office for at least half of every month, citing commuting costs, interference with family life, and bemoaning the alleged lack of consultation. CBA has pointed out that flexible working options remain available, including providing more tailored arrangements to suit individual circumstances in line with their enterprise agreement obligations. However, connection, innovation, and the ability to build and strengthen relationships is fundamental to how CBA continues to work. We continue to watch development on this matter, noting the proliferation of academic research regarding the pros and cons of working from home, and the government's legislative agenda regarding enshrining the right to flexibility into an employee's basic rights. And rounding out court actions, we spoke in April about a significant decision of the full bench of the Federal Court which ruled that employees cannot mandate employees to work on public holidays without first seeking the employee's agreement, even where a contract of employment, award or enterprise agreement suggests that an employee may be required to work certain public holidays. This issue affected a subsidiary of BHP and has broad-reaching applications to many other employers and industries. This month, BHP sought leave to appeal the decision in the High Court, noting the serious adverse effect it would have on the ability of employers to confidently roster employees to work on public holidays. In a sign of the implications for business more broadly, the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry have indicated that they may also intervene to support the appeal. We will follow this case with interest. And finally, this month marked the completion of Sandra Parker's 5-year term as Fair Work Ombudsman. And, following her announcement that she would not seek reappointment, the government announced the appointment of Anna Booth to be our next Fair Work Ombudsman, effective 1st of September. What an interesting 5 years it has been, as Ms Parker has overseen the rise of wage theft and has been required to become tougher on compliance and enforcement, as recommended by the government's Migrant Workers Task Force. The Ombudsman now issues about 2,300 compliance notices a year, up from 200 a year when Ms Parker first started in her role, and litigation activity has increased fourfold as compared to 5 years ago. Ms Parker's observations on her last 5 years were reported on recently and made for interesting messaging from an importance of payroll perspective. Ms Parker talked of the positive signs of improvement by employers in relation to investing in payroll, including auditing and record keeping, and supporting payroll teams. However, she also talked of recent reports that payroll workers are feeling burnt out and under-supported, which she said suggests that employers need to invest still more in payroll, including particularly not adding remediations on top of a payroll team's usual workload. And so we wish Sandra well heading into her next venture. And we welcome the new Fair Work Ombudsman, Anna Booth. Ms Booth, who is currently in a commercial role, was Deputy President of the Fair Work Commission from 2012 to 2020, and prior to that was the National Secretary of the Textile, Clothing and Footwear Union. Ms Booth comes into the role at quite an interesting time for the Office of the Fair Work Ombudsman, including the introduction of the criminalisation of wage theft, inevitable jurisdiction questions regarding wage theft legislation issues at a federal level versus the Queensland and Victorian state levels, the government's IR reforms, and the addition of superannuation guarantee as one of the national employment standards. We wish Ms Booth all the best in her new role, and we will report back on the Ombudsman's new priorities under Ms Booth as they are released. And before we wrap up, a brief note about our next Payroll Leaders Forum. My fellow partner Claire Soccio will be joined by Andrew Farr, a partner in PwC's workplace law practice, to explore the Secure Jobs Better Pay Act and provide insights into what these changes mean for employers and specifically payroll teams. We will cover topics including limits on fixed-term contracts, pay secrecy, changes to the bargaining system, and new compliance and enforcement rules, and what your organisation needs to consider in response to these changes. To register, please go to the link on your screen. And that's it for this month in Payroll. If you would like to revisit any of our prior updates, they are available on our website at pwc.com.au/payroll. And if you have any questions or need for support, please reach out to myself or your usual PwC contact. Until next time, have a great month in Payroll.